My family tree been on the run, chased by vampires raised on a block. My roots been tossed into the wind, can never go back home again. In my mind, in my heart, I believe that everything I am and everything that I'll be is the wildest fantasy. Can we live forever? Make water in the desert. Our love we can rekindle. My body is a symbol. My body is a symbol. My tree built all these ships and guns. Nightmares teach more than dreaming does. And I know that I won't look away. My soul, it goes there every day. In my mind, in my heart, I believe that everything I am and everything that I'll be is the wildest fantasy. Can we live forever? Make water in the desert. Our love we can rekindle. My body is a symbol. My body is a symbol. In my mind, in my heart, I believe that everything I am and everything that I'll be. In my mind, in my heart, I believe that. In my mind, in my heart, I believe that everything I am and everything that I'll be. In my mind, in my heart. Can we live forever? Make water in the desert. Our love we can rekindle. My body is a symbol. My body is a symbol. In my mind, in my heart, I believe that. My family tree been on the run. I took my strange ways of being and made the world that worked for me. I took my strange ways of being and made the world I couldn't get. I'm all the other parts of me.
Opening plenary. I'm your host, Moya Bailey. Thank you. I am the AMP board president, corner of Misogynoir, Octavia Butler fan, and lover of mozzarella sticks. And I will be guiding all of us through the next hour and a half as we consider Afro-feminist futures for the world we want. I want to begin with AMC's land acknowledgement. The AMC is produced on stolen indigenous land named Wawe Antanong by the Anishinaabe. This land is currently governed by the 1807 Treaty of Detroit between the United States and the Ottawa, Ojibwe, Wyandot, and Potawatomi nations. We honor their past, present, and future stewardship of these lands and waters and stand in solidarity with Native people throughout the Anishinaabe and Wyandot diasporas all across Turtle Island. Detroit is a community of indigenous people from many nations, refugees and immigrants, people brought by enslavement and the terror of Jim Crow, settlers and the descendants of settlers, the combinations of all of the above. Once known by the code name Midnight as the last stop of the Underground Railroad, we honor Detroit as the largest majority Black city in the United States with a long history of African diasporic contributions. Detroit is also the U.S. city with the largest concentration of Arab Americans, a border city with historic and growing Latinx communities, and is influenced by the rich contributions of Asian American communities and movements. Thank you. Joining me in person are Paris Hatcher, by way of Atlanta, Georgia, and founder of Black Feminist Future, Asha Ransby Sporn, via Chicago, the former leader of the Black Youth Project, and Amani Love, joining from the greater Detroit area and leader of Trans and Spiritual Justice. And remotely, we have the Demita Frazier, founding member of the Combahee River Collective and co-author of the statement that animates our times together. Hi, Demita.
Hey. The delay is creepy.
It's a little creepy. For longer versions of people's bios, please feel free to check in the chat. All of the longer bios are available there. Folks really wanted to just jump in and get in, so you can learn more about all of these folks there. So I want to start us off with a question that kind of grounds where we're going to go, because we know that we are in a moment of the world being on fire. There have been a lot of things that have happened recently that have really weighed on us. So with that in mind, I want to ask you all, what systems of oppression does your work actively seek to destroy? And I'll actually start with Asha right over here.
Thanks, Moya and Paris and Imani and Demita. So I'm Asha. As Moya mentioned, organized for a long time with a group called BYP 100 that is rooted in organizing through what we call the Black, queer, and feminist lens. And now I co-direct an organization called Dissenters, which is a youth organization that is organizing to resist militarism in all its forms, and also involved in some local defund police organizing in Chicago, where I live. And so most of the organizing that I have done and do is resisting systems of policing, incarceration, and militarism, which I understand to be the kind of violent and armed parts of the state that work to protect the status quo, that work to keep capitalism, our economic system, that work to keep patriarchy and white supremacy in place via violence and the threat of violence. So my work resists those systems. And I see that as fundamentally Black feminist organizing and work, both because, I think the abolitionist work against police and prisons happens in the context, right, of a decades-long buildup of those systems that harms Black women, Black queer people, Black trans people, Black families and communities in a particular way, and in the context of a decades-long project of neoliberal economic reforms that have included gutting social and public programs that people at the margins in our society in terms of race and gender and class rely on. And also because if we look at abolition, if we look at the kind of organizing traditions, those are really things that have been forged by Black feminists. We don't get to prison and police abolition without the work of organizations like Insight. We don't get to police and prison abolition without really the work of Black women and Black feminists who are leading anti-violence work and understanding the limitations of the mainstream women's movement's reliance on criminal punishment as responses to gender violence. We don't get to abolition also without the work of Black women and Black feminists in Black liberation movements who understood that we can't just be centering the experiences of Black men, and we have to be uprooting patriarchy as it manifests in our systems and lives and communities too.
Thank you.
Hey, y'all. Delay. Should I keep talking? I'm okay now? Okay, can you hear me? Hey, y'all. Yes. So my name is Paris Hatcher. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. It's so great to be here at the Allied Media Conference. It's truly legendary. And to be on this panel. I have the pleasure to work at an organization called Black Feminist Future. We're a national Black feminist organization that exists to amplify the brilliance of Black feminisms as well to build Black feminist power. And the reason why we talk about building Black feminist power is because we live in a society and a world at large that operates on systems of oppression, that work on systems of destruction, alienation, around being individual. And I think what Black feminism teaches us is how we can be collective, how we can be building towards a future, how we can be constructive, how we can be working towards practice, not perfection. And when you ask me what, the world that I'm, like the oppressions that we're working against, I think, number one, I want to just give a huge shout out to Moya Bailey, who has given us the term misogynoir. Hello. What a gift. At BFF, this shirt I have one that says break up with patriarchy. So that's definitely one of the systems that we know that we have to break up in our individual life with patriarchy, in our families, in our societies, broader at large. Like that's really like a campaign to break up. And in particular for Black women, girls, and gender expansive people, we have to really break up with misogynoir. And I would say the broader public at large has to break up with misogynoir, which is like the hatred, right, of Black women and girls. And, trans misogynoir is like the hatred of Black trans folks and gender expansive folks. So for me, Black feminisms and the work of folks like Demita with giving us the Combahee River Collective gave us this guide on helping us to understand these systems of oppression, and that because we have intersecting identities, and for so long, so many of our movements have been led with this idea that if we work as Black people on the single issue of race, then all of a sudden, all the issues of our community will be healed. But Black feminisms has taught us that we have to think about the intersections, and that if we don't, we'll just have false solutions. So I'm breaking up with patriarchy. I invite all of y'all to, and I take that work very seriously.
Peace and love, everybody. Oh my goodness, it's been so long since I've been to an AMC. What up, though? Oh my goodness, where do I begin? Oh, well, my name is Emmanuel, Imani Love. Most of y'all know me as Imani Love. Emmanuel is a variation of Emmanuel from the book of Isaiah, which means God is with us. And I've done a lot of work reclaiming that name and what it means to me. I've learned that the name my mother gave me holds power. So there's been a bit of tug and war with that name, but I claim it, Emmanuel. And I'm very grateful to be here. So I guess the work that I commit my life force to, definitely gender justice, especially trans justice. I gained my foundation in organizing work through being sucked up in the tidal wave of trans justice that was born out of the brutal murder of Shelley Hilliard at the beginning of the last decade. And unfortunately, Detroit has been an epicenter of so much violence against Black trans women. And
So yeah, I represent my sisters, Black trans women from Detroit, Black trans women globally. I am devoted to the decriminalization of poverty, doing my part to alleviate or to not. There's no panacea for this epidemic of homelessness, but doing my part to support those afflicted by homelessness, whether that be chronic or situational. And I actually, can I use my phone for my notes? Is that okay? Because I wrote a lot of stuff down. And spiritual justice has definitely become very prevalent in my own life and in my own work and my thinking and approach to things. I define spiritual justice as a movement to combat the systemic reticence and that withholds the truth about the spiritual implications of our movements and our struggles. And so that has definitely become a very central part of my work. And I'm the director of Wage Love Apothecary, which is it's in its chrysalis phase, but it's a healing justice initiative. Healing justice, since my conception as an activist, has been a very, very critical, has played a critical role in my own development as an organizer, as an activist, as a person. And yeah, what else did I have? Excuse me. I wrote a lot of notes down, y'all. Excuse me. And also, just thinking about harm reduction. Harm reduction has been a very important part of my work, especially having a background in street outreach and seeing firsthand a lot of the horrors of people who are dependent on street economies. What does it look like to have support for them in social services, and working, decriminalizing substance use, decriminalizing poverty, decriminalizing sex work, especially survival sex work. So all these things definitely play a role in who I am and how I approach this work. And I'm very grateful. And can we please give a round of applause for Moya Bailey, who I am so grateful to. And I adore her. She is an absolute genius. Her book, oh my goodness, it's like I have it all tabbed up and highlighted. It's just incredible. So much information. If you haven't read Transforming Misogynoir, and yes, to Transforming, absolutely. I'll talk more about that, but yes, we ain't got no choice but to transform. So thank you. And
thank you. Thank you so much. It says it's on. Can you hear me? Yes. Demita, we'd love to hear from you.
I had to get used to this delay. First of all, I really appreciate the fact that some 50 years later than when I first began trying to think about how to have an impact in the world as a young Black woman in a very tumultuous time, and yet here we are. We created a movement. Let me take that back. We didn't recreate a movement. We extended the movement for Black women's power, which originates when we arrived on these shores and continues till today. So what animates me right now is an obsession I have with coalition building 5.0. I think what's most important in terms of the work I'm doing right now is continuing to develop models, practical models that allow people to engage and communicate in the dismantling of structural racism, white supremacy, et al. And I think one of the things that really, and Moya can attest to this, I believe in applied politics. I believe that we have to be engaged despite the fact that we have all the factors that keep us entangled in the madness of late stage capitalism. I'm not going to go on and on about this because I think we're going to have a fruitful conversation. But I was just struck by a couple of things that y'all said. First of all, I'm so grateful that we are now in 2022 capable of having conversations about spiritual power, spiritual justice, things that we raised actually during the Combahee era, but people weren't as open to hearing it. And I think what's really amazing is to recognize that for each one of, well, Moya, we haven't heard from you, but I think for the other three people, it's astounding to me that the notion of young people engaging in a youth-based movement really, really had its roots in the 60s. And it's thrilling to me, the work that y'all are doing, because the analysis is there, the devotion to creating a space for Black women to be truly, truly, again, transforming and transformative. So my current obsession is cultural competence and trying to get our allies to evolve.
That's it.
So.
That's it. I love that, Demita. And that question of application is really what takes us into my next question for you all. In terms of what is next and thinking of these allies, how could people show up to movement work if Black women, girls, and folks who are read as Black women are held at the center of our organizing? How do we want allies to show up? What kind of things would be useful for them to do to support the work that we're doing? And this time I want to start with Amani and work back.
Okay. So, yeah, I was going to wear a shirt today, a cute little crop top that said fun Black femmes. But yes, fun does, for Christ's sake, individually and organizationally. Yes, we need funding capacity. So fun Black femmes. Hashtag.
Yes.
And listen to us. Listen to us. What does it mean to listen? I love the concept of deep listening, which is, taking time to really take in and process what someone is sharing with you, honoring that vulnerability. And I actually have a bunch of stuff that I can share. And there's a lot of healing work. One of my favorite essays by Bell Hooks, Healing the Male Spirit, Rest in Power. And she talked a lot about, and I love how she has this very compassionate approach to understanding the ways in which misogyny and a lot of these white supremacist ideologies and this white European barbarism that is perpetuated through the behavior of a lot of Black men in our communities, how she approached that topic with such compassion, understanding that even they had a lot of healing work to do. Perpetrators of violence within themselves have a lot of healing work to do. So, thinking about when it comes to healing, there's been this, I've noticed, throughout social media and just, in conversation, really holding ourselves accountable to think about the role that we play in our own suffering. And Bell Hooks talking about maternal sadism and this patriarchal caretaking. We have a responsibility to unlearn, which at this point in this era, unlearning is the highest form of learning. especially as we think about the decolonization of the spirit, which is hyper essential to our liberation. And as we know, when Black women are liberated, that liberation will trickle down. And yes, and you know, the work that we have to do, we have a responsibility to do to heal, you know, a lot of the curses and cyclical traumas and abuses within our own families, within our own lineages. And that is a responsibility, but particularly for non-Black women, that is, it would behoove you to do that deeper work into healing the violence that is cyclical in your own familial lineages.
I love what you just offered. It's super powerful, and I think we oftentimes forget or deny our spirit in service of this work. And it's one of the components of what makes us whole and complete as a person. And I think in particular, it's hard because the conditions of like what we're up against are just so, it's hard, right? It's almost like we have to disconnect to be able to do our work. It feels like at times, because we feel really weary. I've been doing reproductive justice work for about 20 years. And with this Supreme Court strike down, which is incredibly dangerous and horrific, and even though that I knew that it was coming mentally, emotionally, spiritually, on the spirit level, it's been really difficult. And the reason why it's been so difficult is, I think there's several reasons, but I think one, to be honest, with this question that you've offered is, for so long, the main character in this abortion fight has been white women. And you keep seeing it over and over again. You cut on a march, you cut on this, you cut on the news. It continues to erase the decades of work on this issue, the voices, the leadership, right? It keeps like reinforcing, in many ways, a very dangerous narrative that this is a white woman's issue. And we just know that's not true. And so much of this experience right now is, especially when we think about building a robust feminist movement, is the willingness, and this is like that work you're talking about, like healing, the willingness to heal your generation and all of that, but also the willingness not to be the center, the main character. So what does that actually mean, right? It means that when you're talking about abortion bans that are happening, that it's not, well, just move and leave your state. Just come to sunny California or move to Illinois, you know. Most of Black folks live in the South, and that's where we want to be, and that's where we're going to live. And so instead of, it's not an easy thing for us to move away. Perhaps it's around how do we move resources to the folks who are, that are fighting on the front line. How do we amplify the leadership and the experiences? That in that amplification, it may mean that your particular experience will not be centered, right? So amplify a group that you may not know. How can you be of service, right? And how can you be doing some of that deeply transformational work to show up to not just be an ally, but an accomplice in the work that needs to be done? I think we are in a time where, yes, give your resources, right? But also, to me, that's not enough. What is your transformation, right? How do you make sure that you are not a risk, right, when you go to these marches, right? How do you make sure you're not creating danger for other people because you want to turn up and make it about you? How do you make sure that you really are, again, decentering yourself? So I think we are in an interesting time, especially as I'm excited about this resurgence of this 21st century feminist movement. And I'm asserting that Black feminists must lead it. And that's how I think it should roll. And the only way, that assertion can come true, because we will get us free, we have the blueprint, is if those are willing, or there are people who are willing to open doors, to get out the way, to share resources, to amplify, and also learn how to do deep solidarity work. Which is not about just people just sitting on their hands and fretting what to do. you have also your own communities to organize as well.
Thank you for that, Paris. Your use of the word risk made me want to pivot to Demita, because I know Demita had some thoughts about risk as a way for accomplices to show up.
Great. Moya, I'm glad that you inserted me here, because one of the things that's always been a huge concern for me is that we talk about people engaging in the work of transforming awareness, deepening themselves, etc. But I think we have to step back for just 1 second and notice a couple of things. The reason that risk comes up as an issue in my thinking is that when you talk about engaging with dismantling white supremacy, confronting patriarchy, always remember that you're talking about doing this in a context where you will not be rewarded for doing so. And in fact, there's a great deal of spiritual, intellectual, and emotional aversion that comes out of white supremacy that punishes people for being race traitors, punishes women for being women and female people. And I think it's important, as you think as an individual person who's not Black, and you think about what it means to embrace the work of cultural competence, and I don't have my notes in front of me. Imani, I wish I'd done what you did.
Okay.
I think what's most important when you're thinking about engaging in the process of decolonizing your mind, looking at your own family backgrounds, thinking about all the things that are required and the amount of emotional energy and intentionality that are involved in trying to address your own cultural competence as an individual. Cultural competence, by the way, doesn't mean that you suddenly become competent on everybody else's culture. It really brings you in the closest proximity to where you came from as an individual, and begins with that very intrapersonal relationship with self. I think it was Tony K. Bambara, and I'm going to paraphrase, is that, getting well is not a joke. Mm-hmm. Healing is a process of transformation, alchemy, spiritual, the word's not coming to me immediately, but spiritual engagement at a level where you confront both the light and the dark inside yourself. I think one of the most difficult things when we talk about help people confronting and dealing with internalized racism, internalized beliefs in white supremacy that you have to uncover in order to move in a situation where you can relate with Black women in meaningful ways, not superficial ways, but in truly meaningful ways. There is nothing in the dominant culture that promotes this idea. Not in academia, not in business, of course, forget business, but even in activist circles, a lot of times we don't always remind people that the process of truly engaging in undoing racism it's pretty harrowing. And you won't get the rewards that typically happen when you take the time to confront a system like ours. And it's multiple systems. I mean, I think all of you have articulated and highlighted the multitude of intersections that we all stand at as humans. I think the final thing is deciding about whether you're risk embracing or risk averse is a key question to continue to ask yourself, and notice where we're always saying to people, for example, if you see something, say something. That's not always the right way to go. And it also limits the activist energy of people who are shyer, who are introverts, who are, for reasons of life experience, have been hurt by standing out. So risk, because, I'm sorry, and all of the work that we're doing is deeply risky. When you talk about eliminating white supremacy, it's a system that intent upon living in every possible way. And so choosing to align yourself with the Black diaspora of women in this world is challenging. Can I say one more thing?
Go ahead.
Back in the day, when we were, Barbara and Beverly and I, are sitting around trying to write the statement, there was something about saying that if Black women are free, then everyone else will of necessity be freed. And I still don't feel 100% comfortable with that. We are on land that was stolen and colonized, and we struggle to make Indigenous women and the lives of Indigenous women at the center. And so I'm still trying to figure out how we braid those human experiences together so that when we talk about what does freedom really mean and for whom, I think we have to we have to expand our vision on that. But again, I'm not going to go on and on. Thanks, Moya.
Thank you, Jamita.
Wow, thanks for that. I want to talk more about that. But to the question of, what does it make possible by centering Black folks who experience gender oppression, Black women and girls and Black trans folks and Black queer people, and so on. I think by centering those experiences, right, people who are experiencing racism and, capitalist exploitation and patriarchy in layered ways, those stories help us come up with, better solutions, better campaigns, fight for better issues. It helps us understand that we can't fight, sexual violence and domestic violence with cops. It helps us understand that we can't, thank you, Paris, we're not going to get to Black liberation through Black capitalism, through, Black patriarchal family structures and what have you. But really, the understanding of the experiences and the stories is the starting place for translating into a political and systemic analysis of the systems that we live under. So it's not about finding your one Black woman friend or person that you follow on Twitter and listening to everything that they say uncritically. It's not actually about finding, one Black woman or Black trans person to give your money to and letting it, sit with that. It's not about electing specific Black women and, people to office. It's not about those things, right? So, and that's not to say that we shouldn't elect people that support better policies into office. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do mutual aid and give people and organizations your money. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to Black feminist organizers and leaders. You should do all of those things and do so with a political and systemic analysis that is informed by the experiences of people who are experiencing all of these systems and how they're working together, right? Patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacy, policing, prisons, the military industrial complex, they are in deep collaboration with one another, and so too must our liberation strategies. I live in Chicago. We have our first Black woman, Black queer, Black lesbian woman mayor, who has increased the police budget every year since she's been in office, failed to pass, a wide variety of progressive reforms that could support people in terms of housing and economics who are being pushed out of the city of Chicago, Black women being the folks who experience the highest rates of eviction in this country. and who has, failed to respond to demands for investment in non-police mental health crisis response, failed to respond to demands to reopen mental health clinics in the city that everyone, Black people and Black women, so desperately need, and who participated in trying to cover up a police raid of someone named Anjanette Young in 2019, and that came out. Formerly, our former mayor also participated in trying to cover up a police murder of Laquan McDonald. That got a lot of attention. But also, under a Black woman mayor, we have political leaders in Chicago who are trying to cover up police violence. So the Chicago Police Department broke into the wrong apartment, searched, arrested Anjanette Young, who's a Black woman, social worker, while she was in her home, undressed. Failed to respond to her calls that they stopped, that they were in the wrong apartment, that she have the ability to get her clothes and this and that. And this is something that Lori Lightfoot, Black woman mayor, participated in trying to cover up, right? And that's just like one story, an example, and there's so many more. It's not supporting Vice President Kamala Harris, who's trying to pass an $800 billion military budget, right? So it's not about uncritically supporting people that hold certain identities. It's about a starting place for understanding how these systems are working together. And it's to say, yes, by bringing together the experiences of Blackness, of gender, of class, is really a starting place for figuring out, in whatever given scenario, who is being considered most deserving of the least, most deserving of violence, least deserving of power, and how can that experience help us understand how all these systems are working together. So I think that is like an important thing about what, the tradition of Combahee, the tradition of insight, the tradition of so many, Black feminists and Black queer feminists that we're working in, is that it really is about a systemic and power analysis, and centering experiences and stories is just that. Yeah, I'm repeating myself now, but it's just a starting place. And I think that a part of how the systems that we live under adapt, right, is that we get a Black president, we get, a couple Black women who make a lot of money and achieve success under capitalism, and that as a part of the propaganda of the systems itself, right? And we have to be looking at that critically and fighting for solutions that really are about the collective of the masses and majority of folks that are actually being marginalized in our society.
I appreciate that so much. Yes, I think this is one of the conversations that's happening in the academy as well. So what does it mean to move into these upper ranks of the academy? How are people actually doing the work to meet people on the ground? Are people just getting further and further away from community? Are people actually taking the resources that they have and putting it towards others? Or is it just about our own personal fulfillment? And that idea that one person becoming powerful can shift us away from these collective ends. I've heard people also talking about, in the wake of Roe v. Wade, remembering that this legal system was not necessarily set up with our rights, the idea that we have the kind of autonomy that we understand ourselves to have, that the idea that we can imagine a Supreme Court actually doing what we need it to do might also be something we need to shift. So if we're not relying on the state to create the things that we need, how are we shifting our relationships to create the world that we want? And so with that in mind, I want to ask my last question before I let us talk to each other and invite questions from the audience. Related to your work, this statement, if you could finish it, if Black women were free, ... And Demita, I wonder if you want to get us started.
I can't wait.
Go ahead, Demita.
I want to rephrase the question.
Go ahead.
I want to make a statement, and then I want us to ask how. Black women are determined to be free. How do we make that happen?
Mm-hmm.
What are the relationship building activities, coalition building activities, self-education, freedom school activities, the self-examination to begin to undermine some of the internal forces that keep us from creating roads to freedom?
Well,
We still have a huge class and color problem in the Black community. We continue to have conflicts with other friends, family in the diaspora. We continue, and it's interesting, we can craft a whole array of approaches and think about how to make those things fruitful, but we have to also remember that they're happening in a context. So I can tell you that as an African-American woman who was a political radical, a socialist from the 1960s forward, we weren't popular in the Black community. The Black communities are various, but the thing that I was most aware of was that people weren't necessarily enchanted by Black feminism, especially Black intersectional feminism that was unwilling to divide ourselves into parts, but in fact, we're looking for an integrated narrative. We have a lot of issues around conventionality that we still struggle with as people of color and as Black people. I think the other thing that's really critical is that I want to hear more about concrete plans. Like, I'm really ready to continue to engage in the work. What's our plan? And I say that in its multiplicity. By the way, so let's talk about the LGBTQIA community, which I've been a member of, card-carrying member for a long time. Let me tell you that the racism and classism within those communities has been obscured by the idea that somehow we're all joined in our understanding of our plight in a heterosexist world and conformist world. Gay Conservatives for Christ is real. And I think what's really important to remember is, let's sum it up the way grandma would. Your kinfolk are not necessarily your skinfolk. And the fact that Lori Lightfoot turned out to be a disappointment is not too shocking, because she would not be able to be a radical and be elected mayor of the city of Chicago. The same reason why I was like, why is everybody beefing with Obama? He's one person, and he never said he was a radical, ever. So the expectation that race consumes all these ideas and notions about transformation, about progress, you can best believe white supremacy is not interested in transformative Black people. So when we think about how to position ourselves in the context of having to work with all different pieces, it's great to be able to go off and buy land and create a small, perfect community of like-minded people with whom you can build. But the reality is we live in such a much larger context that has multiple parts interlocking systems of survival. Late stage capitalism doesn't care about any of us. how to come up with a way to address a conversation on the streets about how to undo late-stage capitalism. And your point is well taken, Moya, about the fact that there's so many young Black thinkers who are now engaged in the academy, and not enough of us are running freedom schools. There's something that happened with integration that's very unappealing in a way. It diluted the capacity in some ways for the African American communities to develop internal coping mechanisms besides the church, figuring out ways to engage with other people of color so that we can have the cultural competence we need to be effective coalition participants. And then I just think it's real, not to go on and on, but I'm always troubled by when we think about where we are in this cauldron we're living in. We need a multiplicity of approaches. That's why I'm always beefing with socialists, because I'm like, you haven't even sold this to half the people that you intend. We need to develop a way to talk about and think about dismantling capitalism that acknowledges it's going to be a long process. It's going to be a lifetime where you don't get an opportunity to see necessarily the kind of substantive change that you dream of. So, to get to dreams, the most important thing that I learned about being a member of Combahee is that we have to act as if no matter what we're doing in terms of getting free, that we have to be sober and joyful about the fact that just like our ancestors who came here enslaved and had to live without knowing what was coming and still work hard to be free, we have to have that capacity to live in that veil where we really envision a different world. My question is always, and my obsession is, how do we build the pathways? The end.
Ooh, thank you, Demita. Thank you so much, Demita.
From the heart.
And one thing I just want to echo is I think we see the right doing such a good job of doing coalition work. The right does not agree, but the right has figured out how to talk to the different people in their camp and does have a long vision. Yeah.
I think if I were to complete your sentence, if Black women were free, we would have the power, resources, and autonomy to thrive. And I think those three things, you have to have all three, right? You need to have the power, the ability to set agendas, to determine, to be able to decide over institutions, how they're serving you. The autonomy, like really the freedom to be able to navigate your own safety, your own reality, and resources. And it doesn't necessarily have to all be money, right? But to be able to amass the variety of resources that we need to be able to have control and destiny of our fate. I think when you have access to all these three, I think oftentimes we easily romanticize the right. The way they're coming from is that they've had all this space to accumulate power, resources, and autonomy. So they just have it, right? They spend more on issues than we spend. They have a huge mechanism called the church that organizes their people and puts them in places just to, there is a very different, a different type of formation and set of conditions. And I think for us, I'm thinking about when it comes to COVID and how we responded with mutual aid. I think when it comes to these abortion bans and how we are going to be responding by making sure that anyone who needs an abortion can get one. When I think about issues around abolition and making sure our folks are not in jails and prisons, it comes down to community to me. And it actually comes down to not just saying, okay, those groups of people over there are going to fix the problem. It's saying, what am I going to do to help solve the problem? How am I going to be in community? So it does not mean, right, oftentimes the portrait of the activist is like the loud mouth with the bullhorn, right? It's oftentimes not shown the person who takes that phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning who can make sure that your procedure went okay, or the person who's driving you to the next state in the clinic, or the person who is making sure that the mutual aid is going, or the children are fed, or this and this and this and this. There is so many places for us to be able to plug in. And the strength of community, I think there's really an opportunity. We have seen the governments continue to fail and fail and fail us. The Supreme Court never even considered us as people. And so I think we should just take what they say as suggestions, y'all. Hey, you said this is what you think should happen, and we're moving in a different way. Because we must move as if we are morally and justly guided by what is best versus what a set of random 9 people we don't know or not connected to get to make a lot of decisions and impact, right? So I think we have an opportunity to build deeper networks, to be in community and practice, being in community with each other, actually just being in community, just going to your neighbors and say, hey, how's it going, right? I mean, literally that really small. And I think that alone has so much tremendous power in what we are able to build in these times.
So the Combahee River Collective statement is like such an important thing in the world, and like to me and my organizing. And so to be in conversation with Damita is like really cool. And
back at all of y'all.
And I think it's like really cool and special to hear you speak about just like the evolution of thinking of that phrase, if Black women were free. It would mean everyone would be free. And I think, I wholeheartedly support and not just to paraphrase, but like support the rest of that statement, which is that it would require the undoing of all of this, right? It would require revolution and transformation and all of that. And so I think, what the tradition of Combahee, which is Black feminist, which is Black queer feminist, which is Black feminist socialist, what that, framework offers us, if the people at the margins are free, then everybody would be free. It offers us this framework to really think about, and as Fannie Lou Hamer said it, like none of us are free until all of us are free. It's about always constantly looking to who's being left out, who's being pushed to the side, who's being, considered not deserving of all of the things that we all actually do deserve in our society. And so I think, Black women being free means the undoing of all of this, transformation, revolution, and that's not like a one-time event that's like going to happen in 10 years or 50 years or 100 years. It's an ongoing process that we have to, always be engaged in. And I think Black feminist traditions offer us like this really, really powerful framework for understanding that. And that's not to say that it's impossible for Black women to be free. It is to say that, the traditions that Black women and Black folks of all genders and who experience gender oppression have offered us is one of the possibility of collective freedom for all of us. And then to what Damita pointed to around the how, like, we have to be so much more organized than we actually are. And just like we are constantly looking to whose stories we have to center, who's being considered more marginalized, we also have to be looking to who's not yet with us and who are you bringing along the way? And that is the work of building movement. That is the work of organizing. If you are not doing that, you need to be like on a daily and weekly and monthly basis. Who are you moving closer to our side? It's not about, you know, saying I have this great analysis and I've read all of these things and I have it figured out and I say the right things on Twitter and I follow the right things on my Instagram story or whatever. Nor is it simply about the personal transformation. Personal transformation is important. We all live under and are conditioned by these terrible systems, and that means we show up to the movement raggedy with all kinds of stuff that we have to work out, and that is a personal responsibility that everyone should hold, and that in and of itself is not the thing that's going to transform the systems. It's not in and of itself revolutionary or radical or organizing. And I think there's just really no getting around the thing that we need lots and lots and lots of people and lots and lots and lots more people who are impacted by these systems and who have a stake in our collective liberation to be with us than currently are. And that is really the work. That means we need large organizations with lots and lots of members that we are a part of. That means we have to be organizing people, our families, our neighbors, you know, our coworkers, whoever you are engaging with in the world who are not yet with us. It's not enough to write people off because they have bad ideas about how things in the world should be. Everything is set up so that people have bad ideas about how the world should be, and it is literally all of our responsibility. If you made your way to this room, if you made your way into this conversation, if you made your way in some way to, you know, even thinking about Black feminism, even thinking about criticizing the economic systems that we live under, if you know, criticizing the anti-Black racism in this world, it is your responsibility to be bringing more and more people closer with us. And that is, you know, the only way these systems will fall is if huge, huge, huge numbers of us say, I'm actually not going to participate in making that thing happen anymore. I'm not going to, you know, show up every day and support the status quo. That's the only way the thing stops being the status quo. So I think there's no getting a way around it. I don't necessarily have all the steps to revolution, but I know a big one. And one we're not going to get around is organizing large numbers of people. And so if you're not doing that, I encourage you to be organizing people. Let yourself be organized. It is uncomfortable work. In some ways, I think our movement culture encourages us to resist that because it is risky. But yeah, that's what I have to say, and the one thing I know we have to do. Yeah.
Can I say something? A lot has been bequeathed to this current era of organizers. We have taken on such a momentous responsibility, and, you know, ultimately we can only do the best that we can. And I think, you know, this movement work has taught me, you know, that there are some things that are just out of my control. As much as I want, you know, to help, you know, liberate people or bring them out of, you know, this precipice of willful ignorance, you know, and even willful blindness to their own struggles, I have to remember that, you know, even healing, even awareness, you know, those things are choices that we make. So I just wanted to share that piece. But, you know, again, if Black women were free, you know, we wouldn't have to worry about anyone's economic or spiritual thrival. If Black women were free, we would not have to do the work of rematriating the land. We would not have to. Our relationship to the land would be one that is holistic, loving, and regenerative. If Black women were free, this could be a poem, I swear.
I heard it.
There would. One of the best ways I've heard it is the social remediation of our soul soil. You know, when we talk about this spiritual revolution, this revolution of the heart, you know, it is at this point, I'm really just, you know, speaking to y'all as a Black trans anarcho-syndicalist. if people, some would probably vehemently disagree that the only solution is love, but I'm like, it really is. But we think about, I wrote about this in an essay on spiritual justice in volume 2 of Trans Bodies, Trans Selves. And I spoke about how the love that we seek, it transcends romanticism, eroticism, charity, and affection. We're talking about a love that is truly rooted in deep compassion and care for each other, a liberatory love. And yeah, there's so much to be said, but I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, and freedom. We say, because the idea behind like quotes like from Fannie Lou Hamer, around this, she speaks about this collective freedom, that unless we achieve this collective freedom, then even individual freedom means nothing, in essence. And and I absolutely agree with that statement, but I also understand that there's room for multiple truths. And that, again, I think by doing the work, we have to, be exemplars of what it means to be committed to liberation and to love in its most diverse sense, but in the most powerful sense. Again, this transcendental form of love.
I love that. And with this question of love, I'm going to pose something to you to kind of close us out, which is, when I think about the left, I wonder too how we are loving each other to get to the place of these questions that you're asking Paris about, and you too, Asha, about how are we building community? How do people feel invited into movement space? Do they feel connected and like they can build, stay, and move forward? So when we have a Black feminist future in mind, how are we bringing that ethic of care, compassion, love into how we're organizing? Are there places where we can dig a little deeper? Are there places where you feel like we are doing that really well? And that's to anyone.
I have something.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Paris, you've been doing this work around reproductive rights and reproductive freedom for a while. And I think it's so interesting that it's just amazing to me that we haven't just basically taken over the government and said, no, we're not doing this, and period. This whole retrenchment is surreal, but I also want to say the thing that will be interesting with this iteration of having to take women's agency back, and I guess what I'm going to say is just, we're going to have to truly recognize that we are at a moment where we can actually organize in a way that we've never been able to do. Because what happened with the end of Roe hasn't happened since the end of the 19th century with Plessy v. Ferguson and all the other anti-Reconstruction laws and behaviors and cultural ethics that we lived with during that time. And so we have a chance to build some coalitions across all sorts of lines right now, because, and it's really hard when white folks realize, yeah, they'll take your toys away from you, even you. So it's a chance for us to make coalition based in a truly common outcome. It's going to hit Black and brown and other women of color the hardest, because it's also going to hit poor white women, poor everybody, truly hard. So, and to the point with regard to building a mass movement, when you look at the history of this country, building a mass movement's not easy. It's really fascinating to me that every populist movement that started in the 19th century floundered on the rocks of racism and the incapacity of people to, because of how they've been educated and how they've been acculturated, really being able to see Black people as human equals remains a struggle today. And so I think one of the things that we have to confront is, in building a mass movement, how do we leverage our power so that we can make that movement happen? And our powers, because it's not just one type of power. This whole idea of trying to build a mass Black feminist movement, we got a lot of spankings from all kinds of, very conventional people who were not feeling anything that we were talking about. And I don't think we're that far away from that now. So in terms of building a Black feminist movement that centers Black women's agency and Black women's survival, it's going to be just an incredible challenge. But we're going to do it. We have to do it. We have to engage. But again, trying to figure out, we are Black communities. We're not just one. And two, also one other thing I'll say, and I'll let this go, that poem that Adrienne Rich wrote, where she talks about the dream of a common language, half the time when we're talking about terms and ideology, and I'm not even sure if we all share the same perspective on what these things mean. Mm-hmm. So there's so much connectivity that we need to build, and how to do that while we're living in this cauldron that's the knot I'm trying to untie.
Yes, thank you, Demita. We just have a few moments left, so if folks want to just make like a last comment.
So I started laughing when you mentioned the love piece and the care piece, because it's typically something that I'm always trying to, I shouldn't say I'm not against those things. I love those things. But it oftentimes comes with I expect this from Black feminists, which oftentimes comes off as mothering and caretaking. So then I was thinking about Bell Hooks, and I think she gave us a really great definition around love. And so I Googled it right here. So love is a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. And that's actually something that I can get behind. And I can get behind it when it actually is moving both ways. Mm-hmm. So when I think about, I'm like, the doors of Black feminist futures open, join us. Be willing to be in that care and knowledge and that trust, not as just something that you should receive, but as something you should be giving, right? Be willing to be transformed, be willing to be delight and to have joy. But it's not a banking method of, I'm gonna get my cup full. You should be thinking about how you are replenishing the cups of others.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Amen.
I appreciate that, because when you asked the question, I also thought of bell hooks, right? And Demita's point, right, around we use terms a lot of the time and mean a lot of different things, and I think love is definitely one of them. It's not, I don't think a Black feminist approach or what bell hooks would offer is that, love can exist where there is oppression, where there is abuse, where they're, in a job that's exploiting you. That's not the things that we're trying to love. But love is a thing that is accountable, that is reciprocal, that takes work, that takes consistency. And, I think as an organizer, the principle of being both loving and being agitational is that's where I want to live and exist as a person. Right? It's about being clear about what our politics are, clear about how we want to move people, and, offering care and support along the way. And so I think that looks like how we talk to people and support them on their ideological journeys. I think that looks like, how we show up in our communities. That looks like having food and childcare at meetings and doing, all of those things, being willing to be accountable to, one another, to the things that we agree to do and say with one another. And so, yeah, I think love really does have a place in our movement, but it is that kind of love that takes rigor and a lot of work and includes agitating people. And that really being, to me, I think the version of love that is aligned with a radical politic and vision for the world.
Thank you. All right, then. Thank you all so much. Thank you for joining the opening plenary. And now we are transitioning into our next wonderful moment, which will be the opening ceremony. Yeah. Thank you.
My family tree been on the run, chased by vampires raised on a block. My roof's been tossed into the wind, can never go back home again. In my mind, in my heart, I believe that everything I am and everything that I'll be is the wildest fantasy. Can we live